Did you make my mommy cry?" The tiny voice echoed against the cold marble walls of the grand hallway, shattering a silence so thick it felt like ice. It belonged to Lily, a 3-year-old girl in a faded yellow nightgown, clutching a worn teddy bear named Barnaby tightly to her chest. She stood completely alone in the center of the vast floor, having stepped squarely in front of her mother. She tilted her small head back, looking straight up into the eyes of Marcus Vance. The entire corridor held its breath. Dozens of hardened men, bodyguards who lined the walls like living shadows, froze in place. No one, not the most ruthless gang leaders in the city, not the politicians who took his money, had ever spoken to Marcus in that tone before. Least of all a child barely reaching his knees. But Lily did not take a single step backward. Her small chin was lifted, her dark eyes flashing with a fierce, protective innocence. What the terrifying boss of the Chicago underworld did in the very next second would leave every man in that room too stunned to speak. Yet no one, not even Marcus himself, knew that this tiny girl with a battered teddy bear would soon become the singular weakness his entire empire would tear itself apart to protect. Long before this little girl ever wandered into his hallway, Marcus Vance had built the coldest empire in Chicago. He was 39 years old, a man whose mere name whispered in the wrong room could empty it within seconds. Men who had spent decades surviving the brutal underworld lowered their voices when they spoke of him. Restaurant owners suddenly remembered lost reservations the moment his sleek black car pulled up to their doors. Politicians who spent their entire careers pretending to be untouchable answered his phone calls on the very first ring. The Vance Manor sat hidden behind towering iron gates on the secluded outskirts of the city, surrounded by a private forest that had swallowed generations of dark secrets. Hundreds of men served under him. Housekeepers moved through the halls with their eyes permanently fixed on the floorboards. Every soul who stepped through those iron gates learned one unbreakable rule very quickly. Marcus Vance did not forgive lies. He did not accept them from his bitterest enemies. He did not tolerate them from his most loyal men. And he certainly did not pardon them from anyone unfortunate enough to try. Those who worked closest to him whispered on the rare nights they dared to drink and talk. They said the rule had roots much older than his empire. They whispered that it went back to a small boy standing in a crowded, dirty alleyway, watching his mother being called every ugly, deceitful word a stranger's mouth could form. They said that the boy had screamed the truth back at the men who surrounded her, screamed it until his small throat tore and bled, and that the truth had bought him nothing but a beating he would carry inside his bones for the rest of his life. He had never been able to save his mother that day, so he had made sure, quietly and violently, that no one under his name would ever get away with lying to him again. Have you ever witnessed the extraordinary courage of a child? The kind of pure, unshakable bravery that only comes from a heart that does not yet know how cruel the world can be? If you believe that innocent love can disarm even the most hardened of souls, please take a moment to tap the like button and settle in, because the journey we are about to take together will prove exactly that. Back in the grand hallway, the silence stretched so tight it felt ready to snap. The guards waited for the explosion. They waited for Marcus to gesture with one hand and have the child and her mother removed from the estate forever. Instead, Marcus Vance stared down at the tiny girl blocking his path. He looked at her small hands, gripped so tightly in the fur of her teddy bear. He looked at the fierce, unwavering devotion in her eyes, and inside his chest, beneath 20 years of violence, steel doors, and unbroken silence, something incredibly old and incredibly painful began to stir. Sometimes the walls we build to keep the world out are exactly what trap us in the dark. 2 years before Lily stood her ground in the South Gallery, a young woman arrived at the heavy iron gates of Vance Manor, carrying nothing but a battered suitcase and a sleeping baby wrapped tightly against her chest. Her name was Nora Hayes. She was 28 years old, though the deep exhaustion beneath her eyes made her look older. Lily's father had walked out on them when the baby was only 6 months old, vanishing into the bitter winter wind without leaving so much as a single dollar. Nora had no family left to answer her desperate phone calls. When the housekeeping position at the sprawling Chicago estate opened, she had taken it without asking a single question about the terrifying man who owned the property. She had only asked if her daughter could stay with her in the staff quarters, and she had wept with quiet relief when the answer came back, yes. For 2 long years, Nora kept her head down. She cleaned silently, moved quickly, and never allowed herself to linger in rooms where she did not belong. She was not a naturally shy woman. She was a fierce survivor who had learned the hard way that remaining invisible was the absolute best way to protect the small things you loved. And the only thing she loved in this harsh world was Lily. Lily was a bright, curious child with a mop of dark curls that refused to be tamed, and a laugh that sometimes carried far too loudly down the quiet servant corridors. She dragged her worn teddy bear, Barnaby, everywhere she went. Clara Brooks, the head housekeeper who had served the Vance family for over 30 years, took Nora aside on her very first day. "The little one must not wander," Clara had said, her voice dropping to a careful, low whisper, her eyes darting down the hall. "Not into the north wing, not near the master's private rooms. Do you understand me, my dear? For her sake more than yours." Nora had promised, and she had meant it every time. One quiet Tuesday morning, Clara handed Nora a slip of paper with a room assignment written in crisp black ink. "You have been trusted with the Oak Library today," the older woman said, her tone heavy with solemn instruction. "That room is not open to just anyone. Do it well, do it carefully, and touch absolutely nothing that is not dust." Nora tied her hair back and pushed her cleaning cart up the grand staircase. The Oak Library was suffocatingly silent. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held thousands of dark, leather-bound books. At the far end of the room sat a massive mahogany desk, and on a polished wooden pedestal against the western wall rested an antique porcelain music box. It was exquisitely delicate, painted with tiny, faded blue flowers from another century. Nora knew without being told that she must not touch it. The way it sat completely alone, given more space than anything else in the massive room, communicated its immense, irreplaceable value. She dusted around it, holding her breath, and let it out only when her hands were safely tucked inside her apron. When she finished, she pinned her completed assignment slip to the outside of the heavy double doors, as was the strict protocol, and hurried back downstairs. She did not know that less than an hour later, a younger maid named Sophie Miller would step through those very same doors. Sophie was barely 20, extremely nervous and moving far too quickly. She'd been sent up in a rush to leave a folder of vital shipping documents on the desk for Dante Costa. Sophie had never been inside the Oak Library before, and her anxiety made her clumsy. As she turned sharply to leave, her elbow clipped the edge of the wooden pedestal. The antique porcelain music box tilted, slid, and fell. The sound of it hitting the hardwood floor was a delicate, crystalline shatter that felt utterly final. The tiny metal gears and springs inside sprang loose, plucking a few discordant, broken notes as they spilled across the Persian rug. Sophie froze in sheer terror. For 10 agonizing seconds, she simply stared at the shattered pieces of porcelain and the ruined mechanical heart of the box. Panic seized her throat. Her frantic eyes darted toward the hallway. Pinned to the outside of the door, clearly visible through the slight crack, was Nora's completed cleaning slip from that morning. Sophie's hands began to shake violently. Knowing exactly what Marcus Vance did to people who destroyed his property, she made a selfish, cowardly choice. Without picking up a single broken piece, Sophie slipped out into the corridor, pulled the heavy door shut behind her, and hurried away down the hall as if she had never been there. The broken melody of the music box faded into a dead silence, waiting for the master of the house to return. Innocence is a fragile shield when cowardly hands are searching for someone to blame. An hour after Sophie fled, Marcus Vance pushed open the heavy double doors of his private library. He stopped dead in the middle of his first stride. The color drained completely from his face. He lowered himself slowly to the Persian rug and reached out with a trembling hand. He lifted a single shattered piece of painted porcelain, its tiny blue flowers splintered in half. It was the absolute last piece of his mother he had ever been able to hold. When Marcus rose from the floor, his face had settled into a terrifying dead stillness. The men who worked for him knew that when Marcus shouted, "You might survive the night." When he went completely quiet, someone was going to vanish. He stepped out of the library and looked at the guard in the corridor. "Bring Clara Brooks," he whispered. "Now." Within minutes, the head housekeeper stood trembling before him. Marcus held out the completed assignment slip. "Who was in my library this morning?" Clara swallowed hard, her eyes fixed on the broken porcelain resting in his palm. "Nora Hayes, sir. The morning rotation." Word moved through the massive estate with the silent, consuming speed of a wildfire. By the time Nora was escorted into the South Gallery, half the household staff had already been lined up along the marble walls, flanked by heavily armed guards. This was how the Vance estate handled matters of trust. Everyone watched. Everyone learned the lesson. Sophie Miller stood tucked into the second row of maids, her eyes squeezed shut, completely unable to look at the innocent woman taking the fall for her cowardice. Nora's eyes found the broken pieces in Marcus's hand, and the blood rushed away from her face. "Sir," she stammered, her voice shaking but her posture remarkably straight. "I dusted around it. I swear to you on my life, I did not touch it." Marcus stepped closer. The temperature in the vast hallway seemed to plummet. "This was whole when I left." His voice was a razor coated in frost. "You were in that room alone. Now it is swept across my floor. Explain that to me." "I do not know how it happened, sir," Nora pleaded, her hands trembling fiercely at her sides. "I only know I did not do it." Marcus took another step, his tall frame casting a long shadow over her. "In this house, I know when someone is lying to me. I always know." Nora opened her mouth, but the sheer terror choked her words. There was no version of the truth this terrifying man would ever believe. She was trapped in a nightmare she had done absolutely nothing to deserve. And that was the exact moment a small sound cut through the suffocating silence. The rapid, determined patter of tiny bare feet striking the polished marble. Every head in the South Gallery turned. Lily pushed past the line of towering bodyguards, her dark curls wild from a restless nap, her faded yellow nightgown sweeping the floor. Both of her small arms were wrapped in a death grip around Barnaby the bear, holding him tight against her chest like a fluffy brown shield. She marched straight past the guns, past the terrified maids, and planted herself squarely between the most dangerous man in Chicago and her mother. She tilted her head all the way back, her dark eyes locking onto Marcus's cold, unblinking stare. "Did you make my mommy cry?" The innocent question hung in the dead air. Nora gasped, her hand darting down to grab her daughter's shoulder. "Lily, no," she whispered frantically. "Sweetheart, please come here." But Lily did not move a single inch. She hugged Barnaby tighter, her chin jutting out with fierce, beautiful defiance. "My mommy does not lie," the 3-year-old declared, her voice echoing clearly off the high ceiling. "My mommy never lies." At the back of the room, standing just behind Marcus's right shoulder, Dante Costa went perfectly still. His hand instinctively drifted toward the inside of his tailored jacket. In 15 years of standing by Marcus's side, Dante had seen his boss handle brutal betrayals and violent ambushes. He had never seen him handle a child who simply refused to blink. Marcus Vance stood absolutely frozen. He looked down at the fierce, tiny protector, and the iron vault locked tightly inside his chest suddenly cracked open. For one dizzying second, he was not in his mansion at all. He was a small, helpless boy again, standing in a filthy alleyway, screaming the truth at grown men who were breaking his mother's heart, learning the bitter, agonizing cost of defending a woman who could not defend herself. He did not raise his voice. He did not signal his guards. Instead, while dozens of hardened men watched in absolute disbelief, the most feared boss in the city slowly, carefully, lowered his tall frame down onto one knee, bringing his eyes perfectly level with the little girl and her bear. True strength is not measured by the fear you command, but by the gentleness you can summon when a fragile heart stands bravely against the dark. "Listen to me, little one," Marcus whispered. His voice was a soft, gravelly murmur, so completely stripped of its usual menace that the hardened guards along the wall exchanged bewildered glances. "I am going to find out exactly what happened in that room today. And if your mommy did not do this thing, I will make it right. Every single part of it. I promise you." Lily weighed his face for a long, heavy moment. Then, satisfied by some invisible truth only a child could sense, she gave one solemn, firm nod. Behind her, Nora's iron control finally shattered. A single, ragged sob escaped her lips before she clamped both hands tightly over her mouth. Marcus rose slowly to his feet. His expression remained utterly unreadable, but the heavy pressure in the gallery shifted instantly. Every bodyguard felt the subtle, dangerous change in the air before Marcus even spoke. "Everyone out," he commanded, his voice returning to a smooth, chilling calm. He did not look at a single face in the crowd. "Leo, stay." The household staff filed out in dead silence. Sophie Miller shuffled along in the middle of the pack, her eyes glued to the marble floor, her lungs struggling to pull in air. Nora scooped Lily into her arms, burying her tear-stained face in her daughter's dark curls, and slipped away into the shadows of the corridor. When the massive hall was finally empty, Leo Thorne stepped forward. Leo was Marcus's most trusted lieutenant, a quiet, hyper-observant man who had never sought the spotlight, preferring the shadows to the boardroom. Marcus trusted Leo's eyes more than most men trusted their own brothers. "The security cameras in the north wing," Marcus instructed, his gaze fixed on the empty space where Lily had just stood. "Pull the footage for the corridor outside the Oak Library, from dawn until this exact hour. You pull it yourself. No copies, no mention of it to Dante or anyone else. Understood?" "Understood," Leo replied, turning instantly on his heel. Within 60 minutes, Marcus was sitting in a locked surveillance room, bathed in the pale blue glow of a single monitor. The truth of the morning played out in silent, undeniable gray frames. He watched Nora arrive with her cart, clean with meticulous care, and depart quietly, pinning her slip to the wood. The hallway remained empty for an hour. Then Sophie Miller appeared. She clutched a folder of shipping manifests, hurried into the library, and emerged less than 3 minutes later. Her face on the grainy footage was twisted in absolute panic. She neglected to pull the heavy doors completely shut and practically ran down the hall, desperate to escape her own mess. Marcus did not say a word. He simply tapped the desk twice. Sophie was summoned to his private office shortly after. When she stepped through the doors and saw Marcus standing silently behind his massive desk, every fabricated excuse she had meticulously rehearsed died instantly in her throat. He did not yell. He did not accuse her. He simply stared at her with eyes that felt like black ice. The oppressive silence broke her. Within seconds, she fell to her knees, sobbing violently. The entire confession tumbled out into the quiet room. The clumsy elbow, the shattered porcelain, the terrifying realization of what she had done, and the cowardly choice to let Nora take the blame. She begged him for her life. "You will pack your bags," Marcus said, cutting through her hysteria with a voice entirely devoid of emotion. "You will leave Chicago tonight, and you will never, ever return. That is the only mercy you are going to receive. Get out." She scrambled out of the room, vanishing from the estate within the hour. Late that night, long after the sprawling manor had plunged into darkness, Marcus walked alone. He bypassed the luxurious upper floors and descended into the narrow, dimly lit corridors of the staff quarters. He stopped in front of a modest wooden door, adorned with a crooked, crayon-drawn flower taped right to the center. He raised his hand and knocked. Nora opened the door, dressed in a thick, oversized sweater, her hair falling loosely over her tired shoulders. When she realized who was standing in the dim hallway, she stopped breathing entirely. Marcus did not step inside. He stood awkwardly, a towering figure of absolute power looking entirely out of place in the cramped servant quarters. His hands hung loosely at his sides. "I was wrong," Marcus said quietly, "and I apologized." Nora stared at him, utterly paralyzed. A man who owned half the city did not walk into the basement to apologize to a housekeeper. She opened her mouth, but her voice completely failed her. Before the silence could stretch into discomfort, a fuzzy brown ear peeked around Nora's leg. Then came the second ear, followed by Lily's bright, curious face. The little girl looked up at the terrifying mafia boss, completely devoid of fear. She flashed him a radiant, gap-toothed smile and squeezed Barnaby the bear. Marcus Vance paused. The rigid lines of his jaw softened, and the absolute corner of his mouth twitched upward into the very first genuine smile he had allowed himself in over a decade. True power is never found in the ability to destroy, but in the rare, profound courage required to admit when you are wrong. In the days that followed that quiet midnight apology, Vance Manor began to change in ways no one could easily name. Lily was no longer afraid of the master of the house. In fact, she had become something far more dangerous to the estate's strict routine. She was intensely curious, and a curious 3-year-old girl clutching a worn teddy bear was a force of nature that no heavily armed bodyguard in Chicago had ever been trained to stop. She began to appear in places she absolutely did not belong. She wandered down the South Gallery, her faded nightgowns replaced by neat little dresses her mother painstakingly mended. She would stand boldly in the doorway of the Oak Library, presenting Marcus with crayon drawings of houses that were mostly lopsided triangles and suns that had far too many crooked rays. Nora would chase her down the corridors, her heart hammering in her chest in pure panic. "I am so sorry, sir," Nora would gasp, frantically reaching for her daughter's tiny hand. "I will take her back downstairs immediately. It will absolutely not happen again." But Marcus would simply raise a single hand, his eyes never even leaving his paperwork. "Leave her," he would murmur, his voice steady and calm. "She is not bothering me." Nora never knew what to do with that answer, so she would slowly retreat down the hall, her pulse doing something complicated and entirely new. Then, on a crisp Tuesday morning, a small, bright blue wooden chair appeared in the oak library. No one had been ordered to bring it up from storage. No note was pinned to it. It simply sat there, tucked securely beside Marcus's massive mahogany desk, perfectly sized so a toddler's feet could rest near the floor. Placed neatly on the seat was a brand new drawing pad and a tin of freshly sharpened colored pencils. Lily found it before noon. From that day forward, she claimed it as her own. She did not sit there every hour of every day, but she was there often enough that the maids stopped whispering about it, and the imposing guards in the South Gallery learned to give her brief, respectful nods as she trotted past them. She would sit in her little blue chair, her legs swinging happily above the Persian rug, humming softly to herself as the most dangerous man in the city managed his empire. Marcus, a man who had spent 20 years explaining absolutely nothing to anyone, slowly began answering her endless stream of questions. "What is that?" Lily asked one afternoon, pointing a stubby green pencil at a thick stack of legal documents. Marcus paused, his expensive fountain pen hovering over a signature line that would authorize the hostile takeover of a rival territory. "That is a contract," he replied smoothly, as if speaking to a boardroom executive. "It means two people are promising each other something in writing. It is like a pinky promise, just a very expensive kind of pinky promise." Lily thought about that for a long, serious moment, gave a highly satisfied nod, and went back to aggressively coloring a purple tree. But not everyone in the sprawling house watched this transformation with a softened heart. Dante Costa stood in the doorway of the library later that week, his handsome face a mask of cold, calculated indifference. The heavy silver ring on his right hand, a gift from Marcus symbolizing his untouchable status in the organization, caught the pale afternoon light as he gripped the wooden doorframe. Dante had stood at Marcus's right shoulder for 15 years. He had taken a bullet meant for his boss. He had navigated blood feuds, brutal turf wars, and government investigations. He knew that in their violent, unforgiving world, survival depended entirely on remaining unreachable. A man with no attachments could not be broken. To Dante, the little blue chair was not a charming addition to the room. It was a fatal crack in the armor. It was a flashing neon sign pointing directly to the very first weakness Marcus Vance had ever allowed himself to have. Dante watched Lily meticulously feed Barnaby the bear a pretend cup of tea, and his eyes grew dark and heavy with silent calculation. The greatest tragedies do not begin with a sudden explosion, but with a quiet, unnoticed fracture in a wall that everyone believed to be unbreakable. Late one Friday evening, Marcus did something the estate had never known him to do in his entire tenure as master of the house. He arranged a communal dinner for the household staff. Long wooden tables were set up in the grand dining room, heavily laden with warm, simple food. Maids, cooks, and off-duty guards sat together in a way none of them had ever dared to before. Even Clara Brooks pressed her lips together tightly to hide a rare, genuine smile. Nora arrived holding Lily's hand, intending to sit at the very back near the kitchen doors. But Lily had other plans. The little girl spotted Marcus sitting quietly at the head of the main table. Without a moment of hesitation, Lily pulled her hand from her mother's grasp, marched straight to the empty, heavy oak chair directly to his right, climbed up onto the velvet cushion, and folded her small hands neatly in her lap. "Lily, no," Nora whispered, completely mortified, her face flushing with heat as she hurried over. "Sweetheart, that seat is not for you. Marcus did not even lift his eyes from his glass of sparkling water. "She is fine there," he murmured, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Leave her." Nora sank into the chair directly across the table, her heart hammering against her ribs. When she finally found the courage to look up, Marcus was already looking at her. Neither of them spoke a single word. They did not need to. Something silent, profound, and utterly terrifying passed between them, a quiet acknowledgement of a boundary that had just been permanently erased. A few nights after that dinner, Lily refused to sleep. She had spent the entire evening drawing lopsided purple trees in her blue chair, and her small mind was still spinning with energy. After reading 3 different bedtime stories, Nora finally gave up. She tucked Barnaby the bear beneath Lily's arm and slipped out of the staff quarters to the main kitchen to warm a small cup of milk. The sprawling manor was completely silent at that hour. A single low light burned above the marble kitchen counter. Nora moved carefully, whisking the heavy kettle off the stove before it could whistle. She was so focused on not making a sound that she did not hear him walk in. "Trouble sleeping?" Nora gasped, nearly dropping the porcelain cup. She spun around, pressing one hand to her chest. Marcus stood in the arched doorway. He wore a simple dark shirt with the sleeves pushed up to his elbows, looking stripped of his intimidating armor, appearing for once just like an ordinary man who had come downstairs for a glass of water. "Lily, sir," Nora breathed, lowering her eyes quickly. "She is overexcited. I'm so sorry. We did not mean to disturb you." "You did not," Marcus said, crossing the kitchen quietly. He filled a glass at the sink and leaned against the counter opposite her. "I was already awake." He paused for a long moment, the silence stretching comfortably between them. "Her father," he said finally. It was not a question. Nora's hands tightened around the warm cup. "He left when Lily was 6 months old. He did not want a wife who was exhausted all the time, or a baby who cried in the night. I've not heard his voice in nearly 3 years. My parents are both gone. Before I found this job, I moved a great many times. Small, freezing rooms, other people's worn-out couches. This house was the first door in a very long time that did not slam shut in my face." Marcus listened without moving a single muscle. The terrifying stillness that usually made his men tremble had completely changed shape. It was now the stillness of a man offering his absolute, undivided attention. He did not offer her empty promises. He simply let her be heard. "I should take this up to her," Nora murmured softly, stepping toward the doorway. She was almost through the archway when his voice stopped her. It was quieter than she had ever heard it. "Nora." She turned. "This estate is safer for both of you than anywhere else in this entire city," Marcus said, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a fierce, quiet intensity. "Please do not ever feel that you need to leave." Nora could not find her voice. She nodded once, a single breathless motion, and stepped out into the dark corridor. Halfway down the long hallway, she caught her own reflection in a darkened window pane. She stopped walking. She was smiling. The walls we build to protect our shattered hearts are often dismantled not by overwhelming force, but by the quiet arrival of someone who simply asks to stand beside us in the dark. A little more than a week later, in the small, quiet hours long before dawn, Lily had her first nightmare in months. Nora did not hear her cry. She was down in the basement laundry room with Clara Brooks, her sleeves rolled up, rushing to fold a massive pile of warm sheets needed for an early morning event. They had left Lily sleeping soundly, curled around Barnaby the bear exactly the way she always slept. The little girl woke up sobbing. She sat up in the pitch-black room, her tiny chest heaving, tears already spilling hot and fast down her cheeks before her eyes were even fully open. She reached out blindly in the dark for her mother, but her mother was not there. Disoriented and completely terrified by the shadows of the cramped room, Lily slipped off the edge of the mattress. With Barnaby dangling loosely from one hand, she pushed open the door of the staff quarters. She did not turn toward the basement stairs. Instead, driven by the pure, blind instinct of a frightened child, her bare feet padded softly across the cold floorboards, leading her in the opposite direction. She wandered up the back stairs, past the sleeping wing, and out into the hushed, expansive marble of the north wing. She was walking toward the only place in the massive, intimidating estate that she had firmly decided was entirely safe. The heavy double doors of the oak library were slightly ajar. A single warm lamp burned inside. Marcus was still at his desk. He slept very little, his mind constantly turning over territory lines and gang disputes. He glanced up at the incredibly soft sound of a small body brushing against the heavy wood of the doorframe. For a second, he thought his exhausted mind was playing tricks on him. Then, he saw her face. Marcus was out of his leather chair before his pen even finished rolling across the mahogany desk. He crossed the vast room in 3 massive strides and stopped right in front of her. For one strange, suspended heartbeat, the most ruthless man in Chicago did not know what to do with his own hands. He had held loaded weapons. He had held extortion contracts. He had held terrifying men by the collars of their expensive suits. He had never, in his entire life, picked up a crying child. He hesitated only for a second. Then, with the agonizing care of a man defusing a highly unstable explosive, Marcus crouched down. He slid one large arm behind her small back and the other beneath her tiny legs, and he lifted her up. Lily curled into him instantly, both of her small arms wrapped tightly around his neck. Barnaby the bear was pressed flat between her chest and his crisp dress shirt. She buried her wet face into the warm crook of his shoulder and cried, and cried, and slowly, softly cried herself out. Her tiny body eventually went heavy and warm against him. Her breathing slowed to a peaceful rhythm. She was fast asleep. Marcus did not move an inch. He stood perfectly still in the middle of his own library with a sleeping 3-year-old safely in his arms. He felt her small, steady heartbeat drumming against his own. He felt something so completely foreign, so incredibly unfamiliar expanding in his chest that it frightened him far more than any enemy ever had. Have you ever experienced a moment where someone you thought you figured out completely surprised you with their gentleness? If you have a story about finding comfort in an unexpected place, please tell us in the comments below. We read every single one, and your stories truly mean the world to us. He did not hear the frantic footsteps rushing down the corridor. Nora appeared in the doorway, breathless and panicked, searching for her missing daughter. She stopped so abruptly it was as if she had walked headfirst into a solid brick wall. In the soft, low lamplight, she watched the most feared boss in the city holding her child against his heart. Something deep inside Nora, a fragile hope she had believed was entirely dead for 3 long years, quietly broke completely open. Marcus met her eyes across the room. "She is fine," he whispered into the silence. "Let her sleep. The armor we wear to survive the world can deflect 1,000 bullets, but it will always shatter at the gentle weight of a child asleep on your shoulder." The unmarked envelope arrived 3 days later, buried deep in the middle of a stack of ordinary morning correspondence. There was no return address. Marcus opened it himself. Inside the heavy paper was a single photograph. It was a picture of Lily, laughing brightly in the back garden of the estate. She was sitting in the tall green grass with Barnaby the bear resting on her lap, holding a fistful of small yellow flowers she had clearly picked without permission. She did not know a camera was watching her. Whoever had taken the picture had done so from entirely beyond the outer stone wall, using a highly specialized telephoto lens from a distance no ordinary passerby could have ever managed. Marcus flipped the glossy photograph over. On the back, written in thick black block letters that had been pressed into the paper with vicious force, ran a single chilling line. Even your weakest point can be seen. Next time, it will not only be a picture. At the bottom corner, a small, distinct mark had been pressed into the heavy paper. Marcus recognized it before his hand had even finished lowering the photograph to his mahogany desk. It was the mark of the Vega Syndicate, the oldest and coldest enemy of the Vance name. For the first time in 20 years, Marcus Vance's blood turned completely to ice. Dante Costa was standing near the tall windows when Marcus opened the envelope. Dante crossed to the desk in 2 quick strides. He saw the captured image, saw the handwriting, and saw the Syndicate's mark. His jaw tightened violently. The heavy silver ring on his right hand gleamed as he placed his palm flat on the back of Marcus's leather chair. "Give me 12 hours, Dante said, his voice low and immediate. "I will take 4 of my best men. I will go tonight, and I will make them deeply regret ever printing that photograph. She will never see the outside of these walls unprotected again." "You will stand down," Marcus replied quietly. Dante blinked, visibly taken aback. "Marcus, they are threatening a child inside your own walls. We cannot wait. You will stand down until I have real intelligence in my hand," Marcus ordered, his eyes never leaving the picture on his desk. "The Vegas Syndicate has wanted a war with us for over a decade, but they never had the nerve to actually start one. Something is entirely different now. I want to know exactly what it is before I make a blind move." Dante held his silence for a long, heavy moment. His eyes flickered with a quiet, unreadable calculation. Then he nodded once and stepped back into the shadows of the library. Within the hour, Vance Manor went into a complete, suffocating lockdown. To the outside world, the estate looked exactly the same. But inside the iron gates, the tension was absolute. Extra guards carrying heavy weaponry took up posts in the garden. 2 additional armored vehicles ran perimeter sweeps every 20 minutes. Clara Brooks quietly canceled Nora's scheduled day off, her face tight with a grim expression Nora had never seen before. Nora did not ask a single question. She had lived in this dangerous house long enough to know that certain terrifying questions simply did not receive answers. That night, after the entire estate had finally gone to bed, Marcus stood alone in the oak library with the photograph in his hand. For 2 decades, he had built walls no enemy in Chicago had ever managed to breach. He had firmly believed that having absolutely nothing to lose was the only true form of safety. He had been completely wrong. Loving someone, even in total silence, had made him more vulnerable than any weapon ever could. He set the photograph carefully into his top drawer and locked it. Long past midnight, Marcus walked the silent corridor down to the staff quarters himself. He eased open the door of Nora's small bedroom. Lily was sound asleep, curled around her teddy bear, one small hand fisted tightly in Barnaby's soft brown fur. Marcus crossed the room without making a single sound. He gently lifted Barnaby from her arms with the painstaking care of a man defusing something incredibly precious. From his dark coat pocket, he retrieved a very small object, no larger than a single grain of rice. With a tiny, sharp blade, he carefully opened the stitching along one worn seam, slipped the micro-tracking device deep inside the stuffing, and pressed the fabric securely back together. He placed the bear back exactly where it had been, Lily never stirred. We believe our greatest strength lies in our impenetrable armor, until we discover that true power is fighting to protect a fragile heart that beats entirely outside our own chest. While Marcus was standing outside the closed door of the staff quarters that night, Leo Thorne was 3 floors below in a locked basement office, quietly building the case that would shatter the Empire. Marcus had ordered an absolute audit of the Vega intelligence the same day the photograph arrived. Not through Dante's usual chain of command, but entirely through Leo. For 3 straight nights, Leo tore through every conceivable angle of the threat. The photograph of Lily in the garden had been taken through the dense trees on the western edge of the property. Leo had walked that perimeter himself. He came back completely convinced there was only one single line of sight from beyond the outer stone wall that could have produced that exact frame. That specific line of sight passed directly through a narrow, sharply angled blind spot in the estate's security grid. Only 3 men in the entire Vance organization had ever mapped that specific blind spot. 2 of them were dead. The 3rd man was Dante Costa. That alone was not enough to convince Marcus, so Leo kept digging into the shadows. Financial traces over the last 8 months quietly painted an ugly, undeniable picture. A hidden shell company had been receiving steady cash payments from a laundering firm tied directly to a known Vega syndicate front. That money moved twice, then vanished cleanly into an offshore account held by Dante's distant cousin, a man who worked the night shift at a diner and had never owned anything larger than a used sedan. Leo set the thick folder down on Marcus's mahogany desk at 3 in the morning. He stepped back without saying a single word. Marcus read every page. His face did not change, but the skin across his knuckles turned bloodless white. 15 years. The man who had taken a bullet for him at the docks, the man he had trusted with his life, had been selling him out to the Vega syndicate, waiting patiently for the moment his boss became distracted enough to be easily replaced. Dante knew exactly where Marcus's new weakness lived. By the following afternoon, Marcus had made his agonizing decision. Nora and Lily had to leave the estate immediately. He owned a secluded, entirely off-the-grid property called the Lake House Retreat, hidden safely in the northern woods. He would send them there under new names, just until he could tear the Vega syndicate apart by the roots. But Marcus Vance was a man who had never learned how to explain something gentle to someone he deeply cared about. He called Nora to the Oak Library late that afternoon. She stepped in with her hands folded neatly, her heart racing with a heavy dread. He stood behind his massive desk, his face a perfect, impenetrable mask of cold indifference. He did not offer her a chair. "You and Lily will be leaving the estate," Marcus said, his voice completely flat. "Pack lightly. I will have the travel arrangements finished by tomorrow evening." Nora's face lost all of its color in a single, devastating breath. She had spent the last 2 years bracing quietly for a moment, exactly like this one. She had told herself she was ready for the day the terrifying boss grew tired of a housekeeper's child constantly underfoot, tired of a woman who had never truly belonged in his magnificent, dangerous world. She discovered, standing there with her chest caving in, that she was not ready at all. She did not ask why. She did not ask where they were going. She simply nodded once. "I understand, sir," she whispered, her voice breaking on the final word. She turned and walked out of the room before he could see her eyes fill with hot, bitter tears. When the double doors closed, Marcus opened his mouth to call her back, the words he desperately needed to say, the words that explained the safe house, the impending war, and that leaving only meant coming back, remained trapped tight in his throat. Just outside the library, tucked perfectly into the shadows of the south gallery, Lily had been sitting on the cold floor with her colored pencils. She heard her mother's voice crack. She saw Nora walk past with a trembling chin and shining eyes. Nora was so heartbroken she did not even see her daughter sitting there. Lily sat perfectly still, her red pencil forgotten in her tiny fingers. The small, careful heart inside her chest, the heart that had just begun to believe this cold, beautiful house was slowly turning into a permanent home, cracked cleanly down the middle in the terrible silence that followed. The heaviest burdens we carry are not the harsh truths we are forced to speak, but the gentle words we swallow to keep the people we love safe from the dark. That night, long after the heavy doors of Vance Manor had been locked shut, a small pair of bare feet padded slowly down the south gallery. Lily could not sleep. Her mother had put her to bed with an unusual, devastating softness, kissing her forehead twice before turning her face to the wall so her shoulders could shake in silence. Lily did not know the grown-up words for what she was feeling, but she knew exactly where she needed to go. The heavy doors to the oak library were slightly open. Marcus was sitting at his massive desk, staring blankly at documents he did not really see. He glanced up at the tiny sound of the door creaking. She stood in the doorway, clutching Barnaby the bear so tightly his soft brown ears were bent flat. Her dark curls were messy, and her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, trying incredibly hard to be brave. Her voice came out much smaller than her 3 years should have allowed. "You don't want me and Mommy here anymore, do you?" Marcus was out of his leather chair before he even realized he had moved. He crossed the vast room in 3 strides, and for the second time in his life, the most feared man in Chicago went down on one knee. He did not bother to hide how much her question gutted him. "Little one," Marcus whispered, his voice rough and completely unguarded. "Listen to me. That is absolutely not what this is." She looked at him, waiting the way only a small child can wait for the absolute truth. "There are bad people out there who I have to make go away," he said carefully. "I want you and your mommy to go somewhere quiet and beautiful for a little while, just until I am finished with them. Going away for a small time means coming home to stay for a very, very long time. Do you understand?" Lily searched his face. Then, in a voice that was somehow even quieter than before, she asked, "And you will not leave Mommy all by herself, will you? Because Mommy cries at nighttime when she thinks nobody sees her." Marcus froze. Somewhere deep inside the center of his chest, the final wall he had maintained for 20 years crumbled into dust. He reached out and gently wrapped his large hands over her tiny ones. "I will never leave your Mommy all by herself," he promised. "I swear it." The very next evening, Vance Manor hosted its grand annual charity gala. 200 of Chicago's most powerful politicians, wealthy socialites, and quiet underworld figures mingled under the blazing crystal chandeliers of the ballroom. Nora was assigned to oversee the extra catering staff, moving quickly through the service corridors. Clara Brooks had promised that Lily would remain perfectly safe, asleep in the staff quarters under the watchful eye of a senior maid. In the ballroom, string music drifted over the clinking of expensive champagne glasses. Marcus moved through the crowd in a sharp black tuxedo, shaking hands he despised, offering polite smiles that never quite reached his eyes. But beneath the elegant surface, the empire was quietly shifting. Over the last 48 hours, Marcus had systematically and silently stripped Dante Costa of his power. Half of the estate's security team now reported exclusively to Leo Thorne. Standing near the towering arched windows, Dante sensed the invisible shift. He noticed the subtle change in guard rotations. He saw men he had personally trained looking right past him. Dante knew his window of opportunity was rapidly closing. He decided to strike before the night was over, utilizing the exact security blind spot he had sold to the Vega Syndicate. At 10 o'clock, the senior maid watching Lily was frantically called away to deal with a staged kitchen emergency. She hurried off, neglecting to lock the heavy wooden door behind her. Two of Dante's hired men slipped effortlessly through the shadows of the staff quarters. They entered the tiny bedroom. Lily woke up instantly when an unfamiliar rough hand clamped tightly over her mouth. She fought with the fierce, wild instinct of a cornered animal. She twisted, kicked, and sank her tiny teeth so deeply into the man's wrist that he cursed out loud in pain. In the violent, muffled struggle, Barnaby the bear slipped from her grasp. The little stuffed animal tumbled out of her small arms, hitting the cold wooden floor of the hallway as she was carried away into the suffocating dark. The cruelest illusions in life are the moments we feel most secure, completely unaware that the shadows are already moving in to steal our light. 20 minutes later, Nora Hayes walked down the silent service corridor with a stack of clean linen napkins. She found the bedroom door wide open. The small bed was empty, the sheets violently tangled. Lily was gone. Barnaby the bear, which had tumbled to the floor during the struggle, had been snatched up by one of the kidnappers to muffle the child's terrified screams. The pristine white napkins slipped from Nora's trembling arms, scattering across the floorboards. She did not scream. Driven by sheer, blinding panic, she sprinted in her modest housekeeper's uniform straight through the winding corridors, bursting through the heavy gilded doors into the very center of the grand ballroom. 200 of Chicago's elite turned to stare, but Nora did not care. She pushed past a state senator and grabbed Marcus Vance's tailored sleeve. Marcus turned, a polite, rigid smile on his face, ready to dismiss the interruption. Then he saw her eyes. The blood drained completely from his face. He set his expensive champagne glass on a passing tray and walked out of the ballroom without a single word of explanation to his wealthy guests. In the quiet of the hallway, Nora's voice broke. "She is gone." Marcus's eyes turned the color of iron. He pulled a specialized secure phone from his jacket pocket. The tracking device he had meticulously sewn into Barnaby's seam days ago was answering back. A single, pulsing red dot glowed brightly against the digital map. "The rail yard depot on the west side," Leo Thorne said, appearing like a ghost behind them. "Owned by a Vega shell company." Suddenly, Marcus's phone buzzed. He answered it on speaker. "You see the dot, Marcus?" Dante Costa's smooth, arrogant voice echoed through the receiver. He had deliberately kept the bear with them to ensure Marcus tracked it and came to him. "Come alone. Sign the Chicago territories over to me, or the little girl finds out what scrapyards are used for." "I am on my way," Marcus said, his voice entirely devoid of human warmth. He ended the call. Within 9 minutes, the estate emptied of every loyal, heavily armed man Leo commanded. The convoy moved out like a phantom fleet, using no headlights for the first 3 miles. When they reached the rail yard depot, the massive, corrugated metal doors were partially open. Marcus walked in completely alone, his hands loose at his sides, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned. High above him, hidden in the pitch-black steel rafters, Leo's tactical team had already quietly removed a massive pane of rusted skylight glass. Dante stood proudly in a pool of harsh, yellow halogen light in the center of the concrete floor. Behind him, tied loosely to a heavy wooden chair, was Lily. Her small face was streaked with dirt and tears, but she was not crying anymore. Her chin was lifted in the exact same fierce, defiant way Nora's chin lifted when she refused to break. Dante smiled, twisting the heavy silver ring on his right hand. "Now we talk business, Marcus. Sign the papers, take a quiet retirement, and she lives. I know you. I have known you for 15 years. You will not risk her." Marcus did not look at his former brother. His dark eyes were locked entirely on the tiny girl in the wooden chair. "You made one fatal mistake, Dante," Marcus said, his voice echoing coldly against the metal walls. Dante frowned. "And what is that?" "You thought I still cared about this empire more than I care about her." Before Dante could even process the words, the world exploded. The rusted skylight glass shattered inward. Leo's men breached from 3 directions simultaneously. Gunfire cracked like thunder. Dante's hired men dropped before they could even unholster their weapons. Panic seized Dante's face. He lunged backward, reaching desperately for Lily to use her as a human shield. He only made it 1 step. Leo Thorne fired 2 clean, deafening shots from the rafters. Dante went down hard, his body hitting the cold concrete. The heavy silver ring, the ultimate symbol of his untouchable status, slipped from his lifeless fingers and rolled across the dirty floor, stopping in the shadows. Silence poured back into the massive warehouse like freezing water. Marcus was already at the chair. His hands, which had held guns without shaking for 20 years, trembled violently as he worked the ropes free. He pulled Lily into his chest. Nora burst through the warehouse doors a second later, sprinting across the concrete. She dropped to her knees beside them, wrapping her arms around both Marcus and her daughter. Lily buried her small, dirty face into the warm crook of Marcus's neck. Through her tears, she sobbed the single, beautiful word she had kept locked inside her heart for weeks. "Daddy." It hit Marcus Vance like a bullet made of pure light. He squeezed his eyes shut, wrapping his arms fiercely around his family. "Daddy is here," he whispered into her dark curls. "I've got you." Love is the only force powerful enough to bring an empire to its knees, and the only foundation strong enough to build a true home from the ruins. 4 days passed before Vance Manor finally found its familiar silence again. But it was a completely different kind of silence. In the course of a single, ruthless night, the Vega Syndicate had learned exactly what happened to men who threatened Marcus Vance's family. Whatever war they thought they were preparing to start had been dismantled by dawn, handled quietly and permanently by Leo Thorne. Inside the sprawling estate, the toxic network Dante Costa had spent months building was ripped up by the roots. Nothing of the traitor remained except an empty chair at the long dining table, and even that was quietly removed by the 3rd day. Lily slept deeply in those first few days. Nora did not leave her side for a single second. The little girl lay curled in the narrow bed of the staff quarters, one small hand fisted tightly in the fabric of Nora's shirt. Barnaby the bear was tucked firmly under her chin. He now sported a slightly crooked, freshly stitched ear from his ordeal at the rail yard. But Lily adamantly refused to let anyone try to fix him further. She liked him much better a little braver. On the 4th evening, long after the household had gone to rest, Marcus walked down the narrow corridor to the staff quarters alone. He did not walk as the untouchable boss of the Chicago underworld. He walked simply as a man. He stopped in front of the small wooden door with the crayon flower taped to it, and he knocked softly. Nora opened the door. She wore a thick, soft sweater, her dark hair falling loosely over her tired shoulders. Behind her, Lily was fast asleep on the bed. Marcus did not step inside. He looked at Nora, his dark eyes stripped entirely of their usual intimidating armor. "I am not a good man, Nora," he said, his voice quiet, raw and completely honest. "I want you to know that before I say absolutely anything else. The world I live in is a highly dangerous one. But if you choose to stay, I will be loyal to you in a way I have been loyal to no one else in my entire life. I will love your daughter as my very own, and I will never, ever walk away from either of you. Not for all the power this city has left to offer me." Nora's eyes filled slowly. The tears she had bravely held back since the terrifying night at the rail yard finally slipped free, tracking silently down her cheeks. She did not brush them away. "You believed my daughter the very first time it truly counted," Nora whispered, her voice trembling with an overwhelming, profound love. "You believed a mother's word from the mouth of a child who could not even reach your knee. That is far more than most men give in a lifetime." Marcus closed the small distance between them, gently taking her face in his hands, and pressed his forehead softly against hers. He finally let himself breathe. The seasons turned beautifully at the Vance estate. Lily's small blue chair never left the oak library. It simply became a permanent fixture of the room, as immovable as the mahogany desk itself. She sat in it while Marcus worked, humming softly, drawing houses that grew a little less crooked with every passing month. In the grand kitchen, Nora taught her to crack eggs and fold flour, their bright laughter echoing through rooms that had not known such pure joy in living memory. One warm spring afternoon, in the private back garden, Marcus offered Nora a simple, elegant diamond ring on his open palm. She said yes before he had even finished asking the question. The wedding was incredibly small, held right there beneath the blooming willow trees. Clara Brooks cried into a lace handkerchief. Leo Thorne stood quietly at Marcus's side. Lily wore a beautiful white dress Nora had sewn herself, carrying the rings on a tiny silk cushion, informing every single guest with enormous seriousness that she was officially in charge of the flowers. 2 years later, Marcus Vance walked through the heavy front doors after a long, exhausting day. The guards along the wall stiffened out of sheer habit. But from the far end of the south gallery, a bright, joyous voice rang out. "Daddy!" Lily, now 5 years old, taller and completely fearless, came running down the exact stretch of marble floor where her entire life had once changed. Marcus dropped to one knee without a single thought and caught his daughter tightly against his chest, listening to her happily chatter about her day. At the far end of the hallway, Nora stood watching them, a soft, radiant smile illuminating her face. Standing in the very spot where his life had once been so agonizingly cold and empty, Marcus finally understood the truth. A fortress built on fear and secrets had, without his ever noticing, quietly transformed into a beautiful home. The families we are born into give us our beginning, but the families we bravely choose to build give us our absolute forever. The beautiful truth this story leaves behind is a gentle one. True family is not always defined by blood, by power, or by the heavy walls we build to protect ourselves from a harsh world. Family is made by the people who bravely choose to stay. It is made by those who choose to love us when we are broken, and who choose to protect us until the very end. Sometimes the most hardened hearts can only be unlocked by the purest, most innocent love of a child. Have you ever met someone who quietly changed the entire course of your life without ever meaning to? A child, a stranger, or a small, unexpected kindness that arrived at the exact moment you needed it most? Please share your beautiful stories in the comments below. We read every single one, and every word from your heart truly means the world to us. If Marcus, Nora, and Lily's journey touched your heart today, please take just a moment to subscribe to our channel, tap that like button, and share this video with someone who might need a little extra warmth today. Your incredible support is the only reason we can keep bringing these emotional stories to life. Wishing every single one of you good health, a peaceful heart, and a life full of beautiful, small joys.